I started speaking out back in March after treating my first patient, March 12th, and realizing that no one else was going to basically say anything. I had, a background in drug development, and I recognized that most people were afraid to say anything, and no one was listening. So I reached out to try to get to people in various important positions. That didn't work out. So I think it was like March. Treated the patient March 12th, and I basically took a multi-drug cocktail, steroids, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, vitamin D, and aspirin, and recognized right away that had a hugely impactful response in somebody whose SATs were down in the 70s, and I felt like this needed to be put out there. So I got on Facebook Live, and this went through probably. In about 2 hours, about 400,000 views, which was I probably never had any more than 40 views at the time, um, and and it was taken down after about 2 hours. A lot of the comments said that I should be dead, or I should be um, injured. I was a little bit shook up by reading some of the comments. But at that point in time, decided that it was important to kind of keep getting the message out. Saw when Trump went out and talked about hydroxychloroquine, how that was received, and proceeded to go with Joe Latipo and Simone Gold a couple of months later to Washington to talk about school openings. And on our second visit there in July, we had a massive response to many of our videos. One of the videos went almost, I think, 30 million. I had one on Breitbart that went like close to 8 million. And it went on there. I talked about the censorship. I also talked about the fact that hydroxychloroquine killed the pharmaceutical industry better than it killed the virus. And that got taken down. And I was warned on Twitter. Later on, they came out with another study that I got reprimanded for on Twitter, where I said they had a, and it had already been not allowed to put anything on YouTube early on. By the time July ended, because of all the notoriety from the July event in Washington D.C., I couldn't put anything on Facebook, anything that had even information on Facebook or YouTube. It was immediately, if it had my name on it, it came down. Um, the the in August, I remember getting reprimanded on Twitter for saying there was a study on chloroquine actually affecting um, uh, uh, lung cancer, lung epithelial. They said lung epithelial cells. It turned out to be an adenocarcinoma cell line. So at the time, I made the statement, and this went pretty viral. Was hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine are some of the world's smartest drugs. They'll let the virus attack a cancer cell, but it won't let the virus attack a normal cell. And it basically shut down this narrative that they proved that chloroquine could not work in lung because of the study, which is a lung cancer cell line. But bottom line is, I threw a twist on it that got me a major reprimand from Twitter. And then after that, I started being real cagey and really self-censoring, like Robert said. The account got shadow banned a lot. I would have tens of thousands of followers and maybe get 50 likes on something that was merely fairly significant. And for the most part, I've become in some sense really aware. So I might say, hey, does it stop transmission, and put question marks. Doesn't stop transmission, doesn't stop infection, put question marks behind both, and then throw the study out there. So I had to be kind of cagey about how I put out information, and that seemed to hold off the me getting thrown off of Twitter. But as I said, I wasn't on any other platforms because I got thrown off of all of them. I'll leave it there. Robert talked about a lot of the
Yeah,
things, so I'll just leave it there.
it's so strange, having heard about how these fact checkers don't really care about arriving at the truth of any matter. Having heard what you say about the effectiveness of putting a few question marks in place, there seems to be a kind of dissonance operating in that domain of propaganda projection. that allows them to get into a state where they're not interested in finding the truth, but where, in some formal sense, they're still obeying certain rules of etiquette for only deplatforming people who are making statements of fact and not people who are asking questions. Rather odd, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, well, and I always find it the way they categorize me. They always say, "Oh, he's." I'll give you today. I got categorized in the Washington Post today. They said I can't remember exactly what they said, but it said something raising doubts about the value of vaccines will continue to lead well-intended people to delay getting an updated vaccine. Richard Urso, an ophthalmologist, member of America's Frontline Doctors, a group that spreads COVID misinformation, and many others, cited the Wall Street Journal piece as they questioned the use of coronavirus vaccines. So I replied with a pun to them of the ophthalmologist, of course, helping the ones who can't see to see, trying to bring it all into focus. Some can't see through the foggy lenses. We need to open their eyes to the truth, said the odd doctor. So, I mean, in general, we try to reply to some of these attacks with humor, satire, and other strategies. But most of the time, I just shrug my shoulders and let it roll off. So, for the most part, I've been called one of the top 10 anti-vaxxers, one of the top 10. I've been on the lists of a lot of things starting from 2020, and I feel kind of proud about it actually. So
Richard, it's Neil Oliver here. I just wanted to ask a quick question. As you've detailed there very comprehensively, how outspoken and forthright you've been. Were you surprised at how many people within the profession, scientists, medical professionals, just kept out of it and remained silent and self-censored themselves into invisibility? Did that surprise you or not?
it really did in March 2020. I thought once I started recognizing that I recognized that all the people that worked for entities, it's about 75% of them in the United States. But it took me a while to see that. And so early on, I was really surprised. By the time I got to the summer, I was not as surprised by it. I recognized that they couldn't speak out. And the worrisome thing for me was sometimes there were a lot of people with real anger that we were not following the rules. And so, to Neil, the one thing that really 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 bugged me was the lack of people acknowledging that we can mitigate a damage. So I just never could understand how we couldn't like hypertension. We don't cure it, we mitigate damage with antihypertensives. In COVID, there's obviously going to be inflammation that second, anti-inflammatory drugs, and in the antithrombotics for the potential blood clots, and the respiratory compromise with drugs that were for asthma. So I never could understand, and I would always say, how can you say that you this? I would step to the side and say it's safe to use these drugs here and unsafe to use them outside the hospital. It doesn't make any sense. It's
Yeah,
absolutely absurd. We've never done that.
yeah.
But people would just ignore that statement and said, "Oh, it needs to be in a hospital on label thing." I go, "These are on label for inflammation. These are on label for blood clotting. These are on label for respiratory demise." Talking about attacking the virus, we're talking about on label uses for mitigation of damage, and that usually got people pretty shut down most of the time. But it was a shock for sure.
Yeah, what has struck me, it's not in any way limited to the medical profession or scientists. It struck me from the beginning that if everyone had just shown solidarity within their own professions or whatever, and had all stepped up to stand beside whatever individual had been outspoken, if there had just been that kind of uniformity, that kind of solidarity, we could have nipped the censorship in the bud. If it was the way in which people were left alone as tall poppies that facilitated the cutting down of those lone voices. If everyone had just spoken at the same time, we could have this situation would never have evolved.
And I just
Yeah.
want to comment on that, Neil. One of the things that happened, they made it really clear that if you didn't follow the rules, you might only not only lose your license, but you actually might be liable for criminal mischief. And let me explain that.
Yeah.
In Texas, they said if you were short of masks, I don't know if you remember that early part. There was no masks available back in March, April. And what they said was if you're going around wearing a mask and you're not in the hospital, you're you're interfering with a public health emergency and you might be criminally liable. And they let that out there into the community. So a lot of people were just, wow, no, I'm not just going to lose my license. I might get thrown in jail for a criminal mischief. And that really scared people.
Yeah. Yeah.